Good evening, and thanks for joining tonight's TI Technology webinar hosted by Texas Instruments, where tonight we're going to tackle the digital SAT changes. Super exciting for a lot of teachers and students. My name is Mike Houston, and I'm the moderator for this event. I teach algebra and calculus near Pittsburgh, where I use TI Technology to help make those tough to teach, tough to learn concepts accessible to all my students. And tonight we're really lucky to be joined by Mike Dorsey and Jeff McCullough. Mike has had a passion for sharing his love for numbers and teaching mathematics to students in the St. Louis area for over 25 years. In addition to teaching a variety of math courses, he's enjoyed helping students gain a better understanding of the ACT exam over 10 years, seeing the impact higher scores have in terms of opening doors to college admissions, as well as scholarship opportunities. And with the SAT changing to the digital format, Mike has applied what he's learned about the ACT to help analyze the SAT. Mike's a T-Cubed regional instructor with us and uses technology in his work with students to deepen their conceptual understanding. So, Mike, it's great to have you with us.
It's awesome to be here. Thanks, Mike.
And Jeff co-founded the TI-Nspire super user group with Bryson Perry. He currently teaches Algebra 2 and AP Statistics at St. Mary's Episcopal School in Memphis, Tennessee. And Jeff received the Presidential Award for Excellence in Math and Science Teaching a few years ago, and he's also authored a few books. He's authored the TI-Nspire for Dummies book, as well as the T84 for Dummies book. Jeff, thanks for being with us as well. Jeff, just so you know, I think you're muted. And that's going to be important because I'm hoping that you're going to talk about our agenda.
I'm here. There we go.
All right, Jeff, do you mind talking through what we're planning to do tonight with that agenda?
Okay, sure thing. So hopefully you're here to learn about the new digital SAT. There's been a lot of changes. We're going to talk about some of the topics have changed, a little bit about scoring, definitely go through a few sample problems, get into some strategies, do some actual math here. So I'm really looking forward to it. At the end, if you stick around, there's a webinar drawing at the very end as well.
Awesome. And Mike is going to talk about the expected outcomes. And Mike, you're also muted. Sorry.
My bad. Sorry, guys. I can share topics covered on the SAT with students so they know what to expect, what kind of questions they'll see and versus what kind of stuff they might not see. I can help students identify strategies to tackle SAT problems because sometimes it's not just pure doing the math, but there's some things you can do to help solve problems. And then we're also going to look at solving technology to solve SAT problems more efficiently.
Thanks so much, Mike. Tonight we'll be using the chat window to send general messages. A bunch of folks have already started using that chat window. It's really exciting to see just how many folks we have from literally all across the world, not just the United States. I just saw someone pop in from Canada. I think we have someone that joined us from Honduras and Brazil. So it's really awesome to see just such a truly international community, and everyone's here to hear what Mike and Jeff have to offer. So without further ado, Jeff, I think it is all yours to share your screen.
Great. Okay, so we're going to start talking about the SAT. So now it's an adaptive test. So adaptive tests have, I mean, the traditional test is always you just start with question one, you go through them, and it doesn't change no matter how you're doing. But it's going to be a two-stage adaptive test. So this is a little different. My wife went to nursing school, and she had a truly adaptive test. Every question she got, if she got a hard question, she got it right. She got a harder question after that. So that's how a truly adaptive test. This one's not that. It's in two stages. So you have everybody starts the same. And then depending on how you do in the first half, the first 22 questions are all the same. You get 35 minutes. Depending on how you do, you're going to get either tougher or easier questions depending on how you do in that first half. So it only adapts once from the original. Timing it's definitely a shorter exam. Overall, this is huge for our students. Michael, do you have students who have troubles staying focused for 3 hours and 20 minutes? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest problems with the big stakes testing is just being able to focus for that amount of time. And I know from what I've read, SAT, they really wanted to kind of cut down on the anxiety that students experience. So that's one reason they were kind of shortened the time overall, as well as the number of questions.
Yeah. But what's interesting, the math only got 10 minutes shorter. So, but 14 fewer questions. Oh my goodness. So a lot fewer questions, but it only affected about 10 minutes of the math. Now it's digital, so you got to bring a charged computer. College Board says there's going to be some kind of loaner program. However, I'd just be iffy about that. I don't know how that's going to work. You can bring a pen and pencil. Doesn't have to be number two. Remember, they used to have it. I don't know if you had this where they didn't even like mechanical pencils. It had to be like an old number two pencil. Now you can bring whatever you want to write with. Calculator's allowed in the whole thing. It's not required. It provides a Desmos digital calculator, and then a T84 or TI-Nspire or even TI-Nspire CAS. So Michael, this is maybe unbelievable to you. My school uses TI-Nspire CAS. They're allowed to use that on this whole test.
Yeah, I got problems with people being able to use CAS versus somebody walking in with like a 5-function calculator or just a scientific calculator. That's a huge disadvantage for the people who don't have. So I'm always thinking about equity in testing, and I always want to make sure that my students have the best access to the best that I can share with them, and make sure they know what's the most powerful tool that they can use and that they know how to use it.
Yep. So the by the way, the one question was about the adaptive. So everybody gets the same first 22 questions. If you get 15 right, I think you get bumped up to the harder one. If you don't get that 15 right, you get bumped down, kind of like a consolation round. So the next 22 questions will be more easier than harder questions, but there's still a mix. If you get bumped up, there's more harder than easier questions, but it's still a mix of problems, and your scoring base is based on that. These are some of the things that you'll see. So I wanted you to see what the Blue Book app looks like. So this is what it looks like when you have a test problem. You're allowed to click on this. It has directions if you need it. Right here in the middle on the top is a running countdown timer. So over here, let's see, let me get through this. Sorry. There's a calculator, so you see a Desmos calculator. You can even expand it as well if you want to make it like almost full screen. It does graphing of everything a Desmos calculator does. So you can close that out if you don't want it. Kind of moves the question over. You can access the formula sheet at any time. It's right there. There's some other shortcuts or things here, but not much over there actually. I really like this tool. If you click this once during the test, then the rest of the test, all the questions will have this strike through tool on the right. If you click it, it strikes out those answers. So if you want to cross out some answers, you can do that. Unlike the English section, it doesn't have annotation here. If you click down here, it's got kind of like a summary of the questions. You can see the first question I answered. The second question I flagged. I want to go back to that maybe for review. The third question I did not answer. If I go to that third question, this one is one of those fill in the blank ones. And so hopefully you can see what's being shared here. But fill in the blank ones here. So where you get to fill in the blank, and it used to be that you couldn't put a negative answer, but now the answer can be negative. They have specific directions here about how you can truncate or round that answer. But what's interesting to me, at least, is you have to include 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 characters if it's positive, or up to 6 characters if it's negative. And so you want to include the maximum number if it's some kind of repeating decimal or something like that. But for the most part, you can actually make that bigger or make that side smaller or make the question bigger. So you don't have to have the directions showing, but every time it's one of these fill in the blank, the directions always show for you. Once you're done with the section, if you've answered every question, then you would go to the review page and submit, and so forth. So that's just the general gist of that. And it
Jeff,
covers all that. Yes.
couple of questions. Somebody asked, is there any penalty for flagging questions?
No. So that's just a way for you to kind of keep track, like, hey, you skipped a question, you want to come back and do it before the time is up. And you'll probably have time to come back and do it. The time is not a big factor on this test.
And
Unlike
that's something that's, some people who have been around longer might remember the SAT. There used to be more strategies around guessing because there were penalties for incorrect answers. They
Yep.
got rid of that a few years ago, even, so that wasn't even a thing anymore. And then the other question that I noticed is, how can students know if they're signing up for the digital or the paper and pencil SAT? Do you want to handle that?
So it's all digital all the time. The only lucky people that will not do that is the people who there's some certain accommodations might be taking a paper test. So it kind of depends. If it's just time, I think you're still digital, but some of the accommodations will be taking paper test. And again, the first module, everybody takes 22 questions. The second module, everybody takes, but it's either easier or harder, but there's 22 more questions on that second module.
And I think that's another reason for students to make sure they're practicing with this blue book so that they know how to use the tools before test day.
Sure. It's really nice for them to practice with it. At our school, we did a mock PSAT where they did one of the blue book exams, and I think it was helpful. I think it gave our kids a leg up because we talked about some of the misses they made, and we talked about just the format. They're pretty comfortable and adaptable to the format, but it always helps to practice. Topic wise, it definitely has changed. So you can see even from the traditional SAT we've been having the last few years, the digital SAT now, they bumped up the Algebra 1 to 35%. They changed the corny names. It used to be Heart of Algebra or something. Now they're calling it Algebra, essentially Algebra 1, that's linear algebra, all linear all the time. 35% is advanced math, which is like Algebra 2 pre-cal, that's nonlinear. Not anything nonlinear can pretty much be in there. 70% of the test this is really an algebra test at its core. What do you think about that, Mike? It's really even increased the algebra total here.
Yeah, it's crazy when you look at these numbers.
Yeah. The problem solving, that's been a big emphasis. When Common Core came around, you can see it jumped up to 30% or 29% there. Now they bumped it back down to 15%, and they bumped up the geometry just a little bit, took out imaginary numbers, so now it's just geometry and trig are kind of the weird topics there that they added at the end. These are some topics are only covered on the SAT, not on the PSAT. So these are 3 topics that are on the SAT, but will not be found in the PSAT. PSAT is slightly easier. So that's the general idea of it. Blue Book app is free, by the way, and you can download it at College Board website for sure. Timing. So we have 1 minute and 35 seconds per question. Oh my goodness. I mean, that's so much time. I would say this, our students, they got done, almost everybody, even like an average student got done 5 or 10 minutes early, typically in the math sections. They just finished early. You didn't see people working till the end like I'm used to in every other standardized test. Mike, don't you think that's a big thing on the ACT, the timing?
Huge. I just, anytime I've actually proctored tests, you really see students who are prepared versus students who aren't prepared, where they're scrambling to finish or, just bubbling in stuff at the end because they had no idea their pacing. And I think that's another nice thing that SAT's doing is they're just trying to remove some of these layers around the big stakes testing and what students' experiences around that.
Yeah. So 75% is multiple choice. And then 25% are the student produced responses, which are the ones where you fill in the blanks. It's not, you don't click on A, B, C, D. Breaking down the test, 30% are in context. They're word problems like you might be familiar with. 70% are pure math. So they really cut down on the number of words they're using per question. They say 50 is the max. I counted some that were more than 50 words, but those were only some of the word problems that did get a little bit wordy, but they really have, for College Board purposes, they've cut down the number of words that are on things. Types of problems, and so order, it's supposed to be ordered from easiest to hardest. So each section, each 22 questions, ordered from easiest to hardest. That's subjective, so it's your mileage may vary on that, but in general, that's true. Scoring is not super straightforward. They don't tell us this, but we figured this out. If you look at some of the blogs and things I've studied, so Module 1 counts as more than half of your score, 7/12, and the second module only counts as 5/12, so a little less than half. And the difficult questions count a little bit more than the easier questions. We're not sure exactly how that works, but this is not an easy scoring system to understand. It is they're using some advanced statistics to do some of those things. Mike, if you want mine, I'm gonna share it. I'm gonna have you share your screen and start talking about Algebra 1 and what's up with that.
All righty. Okay. So the Algebra 1 is considered linear topics, and it's 35% of the test. The topics include linear equations in one variable, linear equations in two variables, linear functions, systems of two linear equations in two variables, and linear inequalities in one or two variables. So you want to pay attention to what kind of questions. We're going to do some sample problems here. How many solutions does the system of equations have? And what do we notice about this one? So typically when we see problems like this, they are written in standard form, and this one they've kind of written it a little bit differently. So we might want to rearrange them into standard form. That might be more familiar for what we're used to. And then once we've done that, we've got a bunch of different ways. We can use systems, or we can use substitution, we can use elimination, we might graph, we might have some tools on our calculator, right? So there's elimination. And we've got 0 equals -7. So how many solutions do we have? And then knowing the formulas for slope, when you're looking at standard form, opposite of A divided by B, that might help you, narrow down your choices a little more quickly. So we're getting into some strategies here. And we got the slope of -4. They have the same slope, so they can't have 1 or 2 solutions. And so there's either 0 or infinitely many. This is if we were choosing a different way of solving this. And then what are some ways, if you're a TI-84 user, how could you solve this?
So someone said they use matrix.
Okay.
Matrix.
So yeah, definitely you could do matrices.
So Emily says a polynomial simultaneous 2 solver.
Thank you, Emily, because that's exactly where I wanted to go. I don't know. I know there's always lots of different kinds of experience with the TI-84, and sometimes we like to show some of these somewhat advanced features. If you hit the apps button, and then this app 9, polynomial simultaneous 2, so I can either arrow down and hit it, or I can just click the 9, and then I want to do the simultaneous equation solver, and it lets me choose how many equations and how many unknowns, and there's a couple other settings here, and then I need to use the top row here to go to the next screen. So I'm hit the graph button, and I've done a different problem here, so I'll hit 8. Let's go up there, 8, okay, and I'm going to arrow over, and I got 2, and then I've got 5, and then I've got 4, and 1 and 7. And then I hit the graph button to solve, and it says no solution found. So again, this is one of those situations where somebody who's got a scientific calculator and somebody who's got a graphing calculator with this ability, it's definitely not a level playing field. But if your school has 84s or your students use 84s and this is something you can teach them, it's definitely a benefit for your students. And we also want to look at Nspire real quick. Do we have any Nspire users out there that might want to say what they do?
It's a good question.
They might do
To solve, program solve, let's see. So someone's saying, and I agree, like you don't always have to use technology. I mean, I agree. You can, if you just know your proportions, you can kind of do it that way.
yeah, there's definitely like an algebraic structure thing going on here where you can see there's a multiplier there. And so you could see the multiplier. So that's definitely a way. So here I'm on a document, I'm on an algebra screen. If I go menu and then algebra, and I can do solve system of linear equations. And same thing, I got 2 equations, and I can just type in, 8x plus 2y equals 5. And then 4x plus y equals 7. And it'll tell me. So, yeah. And
so let me ask you this, Mike, that solve, I mean, so either of those, the polynomial solver or on the Nspire, you've got just a, equation, it solves a system for you. You teach your students that in your class if you teach like an Algebra 2 class, do you teach them that or what do you do?
So I did a lot of ACT prep. So I will definitely, in an ACT prep, it's a different thing. And this is maybe the kind of thing where I would show them after they've taken a test. We'll say, hey, now you know how to do it. But when you're taking, standardized tests, you want your students to get as many correct answers as they can. So
yeah, and the workaround in the classroom, you can always require students to show work. I do that. Like I'll say, solve this using substitution, solve this one using elimination. Require them to show work or have a calculator section, no calculator section part of your test. So there's a lot of ways around that, but it is I mean, if they're going to be taking the SAT, it's a great thing to show them because it's pretty fast and it solves the system for them.
Yeah. So then here's just kind of a little reminder about the different things that can happen when you're talking about 2 linear equations and some aspects of the different situations.
I mean, don't you think that's important for them to get a good graphical understanding of how a linear system looks? Like, I think that's key for this test. This is really big.
Absolutely. I think a lot of times I'll fall back on kind of what things mean graphically. I was talking with a class yesterday about absolute value, and I went right to, hey, absolute value graphs, they look like a V. If you're trying to figure out when they're equal to a number, well, if they intersect the V somewhere, there's 2 intersections. If they intersect right at that vertex of the V, then there's 1 solution. And if they intersect somewhere else, then there could be no solution. So that's kind of the 3 different possibilities in that situation. Okay, so here's a little bit different one. Solve this any way you want to. The system of equations, K is a constant. For what value of K will the system of equations have no solution? And yeah, this is one where, do you use the answer choices? Do you try to do it? Do you try to figure it out? What are people's thoughts? Anything popping up on the chat, Jeff?
Let's see. So it has to have matching slopes. Check the slopes. 5 out of 6. Algebra. Use the opposite of A over B.
Yeah. So here's putting the equations in slope-intercept form. and then using the opposite of A over B as well. Oh, okay. And then we also wanted to mention that.
But do you want to go back to that one though?
What?
So do you want to, you can use your calculator to do that. Like, you want to try it?
Do you want me to do that on the Nspire?
Yeah, let's do one on Inspire. So
Okay.
go to a graph page, graph that first one as a relation.
Okay. So we're going to go back. So we hit delete, and then we'll type in 5x minus 6y
Because that way you don't have to solve it for y. It saves
equals
a lot of
7.
time.
So this, again, this for people who haven't used Nspire much, it's, you know, it's definitely a shift, but I think some of the things that you can do on Nspire are pretty powerful. And then we're going to do this to add another graph. So what did you say? We should use ax minus 4y equals 5.
So k times x minus 4y equals
Minus
5.
k.
K
Okay.
times x.
And you have to use the times. So that's something that
You do have to use the times.
can be kind of frustrating when you don't, when you're just learning, or when you've been doing it a while and you forget. Okay, so we've got a slider, and so we got a slider here, and I can change the value. I'm going to move that a little bit. And so
here's a cool thing. So I don't know if you knew this, Michael, but if you double click that the value, don't move the slider. Don't move
okay,
the
I
slider.
just want to show people the slider who hadn't seen it before. If there's anybody
Okay.
who's like not an Nspire person. Okay.
Can you move the PowerPoint back to the answer choices so I can see them?
Yep. There you go.
Okay. Now bring the calculator back up.
Yeah.
Okay. Double click the value there. This is the coolest thing. Type in 25 over 6.
Okay.
That's definitely not it.
That's
now
it.
Don't double click it again. This is like trace mode. You can just type another number and it knows to put it in there. So you don't have to double click again. You just start typing 10/3 and it plugs that in there, and you can see that's probably the answer there.
Is that the answer?
Well, you could always zoom in if you want to see. So you could zoom in and see it a little closer.
There we go. And now we can, so they looked really close. It looked like they were parallel, but they're just a little bit apart there.
Yep. So, and then there's a, an 84 version called the transform app you could use as well. It also works like a slider. You have to get out of that one, I think.
Okay.
Second mode or.
There we go. So there's transform. And so what I did, rather than arrowing through everything, I arrowed up to get to the bottom of the list. Sometimes that can be quicker. Okay, we're going to press any key. And we go y equals. Now, what's the problem here, though?
So now you have to, so type this in, type in 5, 6, we already solved it for x on the other page. 5, 6x minus 7, 6. That was the first equation.
All right.
And then for the next equation, instead of k, we have to use either a, b, or c for the transform map. So it'd be a over 4 x times x minus 5/4. So you had that's a little bit more. You had to solve it, and then you can do that. But now you can either move that slider up and down with your arrow keys, or I believe you can just type a number like 25/6 and it'll jump to it. Oops, 25/6. There you go.
So that's not it. And then we try 10/3.
So it does, it's kind of neat that you can test the answer choices and have them plug it in, but you do have to do that extra work of solving for y if you use the 84 on that one.
Yeah.
Is this a harder or easier question? I'd say this is medium. I'd say this is medium-ish.
Okay. So then we did want to show you an easy question just
Yes.
because, you know, I definitely, I've worked with students that say, oh, I think I did this wrong because it was too easy. Well, you know, tests have to have some easy questions on them because, you know, students need to feel good about themselves a little bit, right? So you got to, you know, show your students some easy ones just so they know, hey, there's
I
going to be
mean,
something to this.
I don't know, Michael, when you took this test, I took the first 3 or 4 or 5 problems. I was like, there's got to be a trick. These are too easy. Like even my students were like, something's going on. This is not, but it really is extremely easy at the beginning. And then don't worry, it'll get hard, but at the beginning, it is easy.
Yeah. All right. So that one was just, yeah, something like that might be on the test, and don't second guess yourself. All right. So I'm going to share back with Jeff. You're going to take over with advanced math.
Okay. Let me get there. Almost there. Okay. So share.
People are sharing some other, some alternative answers there.
Okay.
Like, I'm surprised they didn't have this one.
Okay, so this is the advanced math, and you're going to see equivalent expressions, bunch of nonlinear equations with one variable. Now we'll see systems equations in 2 variables that one or both of them could be nonlinear, and just in general nonlinear functions. So this could be lots of different things: square roots, you know, third power, all kinds of stuff you might see in this. So here is a kind of a classic question. What does the value, when does this reach its maximum, right? So of course you could do this by hand. You could find the 2 roots, find the middle or average of those 2 roots if you wanted to. You could multiply, expand it, use the opposite of b over 2a to find the middle. But you could also graph it on your calculator, right? So let's get out a calculator here. So if you go to the y equals screen here, we're going to clear this off and type in 6 minus 3x and 11 plus 2x. And I usually start with the zoom 6. If you don't know about the grid lines there, to put the grid lines on, you hit second zoom. And there it is on the 3rd line. You can do grid lines if you like the look of that. So when does it reach its maximum? So one of the things we found, and this works for TI-Nspire and TI-84, is you really want to quickly find that maximum. And my favorite zoom to do this, that works really well on a lot of these SAT questions, is a zoom fit. If you've never seen a zoom fit, you hit zoom. If you know it, it's zoom 0. But if you can scroll down, you see there it is. Zoom 0 is zoom fit. And what that does is it fits the zoom fit only adjusts y values. The x values are still 10 to negative 10. It did not adjust the x values at all. It only adjusts y values. But usually these problems, the x values are relatively small. The y values can get pretty big or pretty small. And so I really like, what do you think? Did you find yourself using Zoom Fit a lot when you took this test, Michael?
I'm usually not a fan of Zoom Fit, but again, that's something in my classroom. I want my students to know kind of what the windows should be, but then you want to show them the Zoom Fit so that when they're in a situation where you don't have as much time to think, hey, Zoom Fit will help you.
Yeah, I mean, so we usually start with that Zoom standard, Zoom 6, and then you got to adjust it, and you could adjust it by hand, but it's really nice to do that. And so to find the maximum on the 84, you hit second trace, and you go to the maximum command. And so you have a choice here. You can either mouse to the left like that and press enter. Or if you don't want to mouse around, you can actually just type a number. I don't know if you knew that, but you can actually type a number that's bigger, a bigger X value than where the max is. So I'm just going to type the number 2 because I'm pretty sure that's bigger. And it jumps to that. Now, where is your guess? I'm just going to press enter because there's only one maximum between those 2 points. And there it is at 1.75.
So Jeff,
Michael,
real
yeah.
quick, somebody people are throwing out some different suggestions, and then somebody was surprised they got blown away by the Zoom Fit, and then somebody's asking about Zoom fraction.
So Zoom frac, so Zoom 6 would be here. Zoom frac, what would that do? Let's see. So I don't use Zoom frac very often. So one of those?
I guess. Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, so it didn't really get us exactly what we need. It kind of cuts it. I think it traces differently when it's Zoom frac, so it goes by 1/2. That's kind of the interesting part when you trace it.
Yeah.
So it can trace by 1/2 when you do that. Okay, so let's on Inspire. Inspire really, it's just kind of a neat thing when you do that same problem on Inspire. So if you go to a graphs page, I really use it completely. I like to trace when I do this minus 3x and then 11 plus 2x. And so if you use trace, what's nice about Inspire, it automatically resizes. So menu 5.1, it starts at the y-intercept. If I go left, you can see it resized the window and it went to maximum there. If I press enter, it lays down a point right there at the maximum, which is one of my favorite features. I like to lay down important points, critical points that I want to know about. And so that's pretty easy tool to use. The trace key, I like that it resizes the window for you, which is definitely a little bit different than the 84 there, the way that worked. Let's look at this one. So this one, I want you just for a second, try to solve this one just by hand, like without the calculator at all. Just kind of, just try to solve this one. Just take about 30 seconds here.
So one comment said, as a teacher, this one's not too bad by hand.
Yeah, I agree. One thing that, and I don't know if you do this, Michael, but the first time I did this problem, I actually saw the GCF and I took out 4x squared, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's not really the right move.
That's not what they want us to do on this one.
If-
It's a
if
good
you-
move, but it's not good for these answer choices. So
what we need to train our students to do is glance at the answers, kind of like peek at them. It's almost like cheating. You're kind of go, okay, where am I headed with this problem? And Michael, when you glance at those answers, don't you think you know the first step? When you glance at those answers, what's the first step?
the first step would be to factor out the 4.
Factor out the 4. I'm almost positive D is wrong.
Yeah.
In fact, if you look at 18 times 18, that's not
Way
37.
too big.
D is just a really wrong answer. But you can almost tell right away, factor out the 4. Don't factor out the x squared. So I think that's going to help our students to do that. And then they might see the difference of squares easier, because otherwise you're kind of converting your answer back to what it was, and it's just tougher. I want them to do as little work as possible. Hopefully they see difference of squares. In fact, if they saw the structure of difference of squares, really the only one that looks like that structure is C.
Yeah.
So you almost have it, just knowing the structure of difference of squares there.
Right. So one of our participants said the exact same thing I'm thinking. It doesn't say to factor completely. It just says which one of these is equivalent. And I think that's, I've been stressing with my students as we're working on going back and forth between exponential form and radical form, that, hey, you need to read the question, see what it's asking you to do, because, for instance, today we've been doing negative exponents, but the question today just said rewrite this as an exponent, and so typically we don't leave our final answers with negative exponents, but it would have been okay on the question we're working on. So make sure you're reading the question, see what it's asking you to do, rather doing what you think you're supposed to do.
Yeah. And, I tutor all kinds of students. And one of the things I noticed, Michael, is when I tutor the students who are not as good at actual algebra, the students who would struggle factoring this, they wouldn't see different squares. I mean, a handful of students in almost every class wouldn't be able to factor this, right?
Right.
So this strategy is more for those students who really have trouble factoring. I really want my students to factor this. That's the ideal. But if they don't, whenever it says equivalent there, you could really graph it in your calculator. So if you graph this in your calculator, this first one, and I hit zoom 6, you can even, kind of see the graph. There's the graph, looks kind of like a W there almost. And then if I go to the second graph, if I graph one of these other guys in there, so I go 4, parentheses, x squared, minus x, and then 9x squared.
So some of our participants are making the same suggestion, Jeff, and
Yeah.
another one is talking about one of your other favorite strategies of substituting in 1 for x and seeing which one's equivalent, which I know that's one of your favorites.
Yes, it's really nice. So one way is to graph these guys until the two graphs are equivalent, right? And so you could just keep testing answers until that works. What we're saying with that graph is equivalent. So let me see if I can kind of do that here. So I just need something to write on here. Let me see. So okay, so if I and that first problem, if I plug in 36 times 1 to the 4th, so that's 36, minus 16 times 1 is 16. So 36 minus 16 is 20, right? So then I take the answers and I plug in 1. So answer choice A would be 4, whoops. Four times 1 minus 1 is 0. Oh, that's not going to work. We're done with that one. And then B would be 4 times 9 minus 4 is 5, times 1 plus 1 is 2. That's not it, right? You keep trying until you get it. And that's an interesting strategy of plugging in the number 1. And so when you try like this one to be 4 times 3 minus 2 is 1, times 3 plus 2 is 5, 4 times 5 is 20. We get the same answer that way. So the idea of plugging in a number, whether it be 1 or even if you used your calculator to plug in a number, so those are great backup strategies. I like for my students to have a backup strategy. So in case they don't see the algebra, the factoring or whatever it is, if it says equivalent, there's a lot of different ways of, proving those two things are actually equivalent. Any other comments, Mike, on this one?
Yeah, somebody was commenting that it seems like this is turning into more of a how well can you use your calculator test than a math test.
Ooh.
And I think what they don't know is we're cherry picking some questions here to show how we can use calculators to get through some stuff more easily. But I think there are some other things that the calculator might not help very much
Well,
with.
here's a good one. I mean, this is a I don't know that I would use my calculator on this question. So there are 44 questions, 2 groups of 22. That's exactly right. A model estimates that at the end of the year from 2010 to 2015, the number of raccoons in the population was 120% more than the number of raccoons at the end of the previous year. The model estimates there were 154 raccoons in the population at the end of 2011. Which of the following equations best represents the model where n is the estimated number of raccoons in the population t years after the end of the 2010 and t is less than or equal to 5? Oh my goodness.
And
a lot happening in that question.
I thought this was one where, oh my goodness, they're being sneaky and they're trying to confuse us.
Yeah. And even using a percentage like 120% is, I feel like that's a little bit sneaky there.
Yeah.
I mean, they're trying to trick the students. And I think some of them will be tricked. If you kind of have the basic structure, and I want my students to know this, I want them to think of that number in front of a basic exponential as being the y-intercept or the initial starting point. The base of the exponent, if it's growing, it's going to be 1 plus the rate. And then if it's decaying, it's going to be 1 minus the rate. So I think that's really important to teach our students. So to answer a lot of these, Michael, did you feel like exponentials was definitely emphasized on this test?
Absolutely. And I think as we're going through new curriculum this year, I think in Algebra 1, there's a lot more emphasis on it earlier, where it used to be kind of maybe we'll get to that at the end of the year kind of thing, where it's,
Yeah.
I think it's front loaded a lot more, where we're talking about a lot of the different types of functions together throughout the class. And that just, I mean, that might be a curriculum thing, but I like it. I like talking about stuff earlier rather than running out of time and then you can't get to it.
Yeah. And so when it says 120% more, you know that A value is 1 plus 1.2, so it's 2.2, which again, a lot of students might pick that 1.2 because it looks like 120% there, but it's growing by 120%. And then since 2011 is not that initial value, right? That's the year after,
Right.
and that was 154. I don't need to calculate that it was 70. I just need to know it's a number smaller than 154. The only option is 70, so it's got to be B at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
definitely, I think SAT has a tradition of being sneakier and more tricks than ACT.
Yeah.
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 And you know, somebody could easily argue that's just straightforward. You got to be careful reading, and you got to know that it's growth, so it's 1 plus the rate. And if you did the 1.2, then that's on you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So
somebody said that's
problem
evil. And one more comment real quick. Somebody asked, is ACT going digital? I know some ACT does have a digital format, and in Missouri, there is one school district that they've been doing digital for years. And fall of 2020, ACT was supposed to be rolling out individual subject tests that would be digital only, but something happened in 2020 and they still haven't rolled it out yet. So
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen with that.
Yeah. So they did make an announcement. They're in a couple years going to go digital. It's not going to be adaptive. It's going to be just a paper test that's on the digital, like kind of thing.
Yeah.
So just, same idea. So this is problem solving and data analysis. Again, it went from 30% or close to 30% down to 15%. So they really took it down a notch, but it's got a lot of different stuff on here. Even stuff like I would call some of this middle school math proportion, percentages, then it really does get into some stats kind of stuff. Like you'd almost hope students have either had some kind of statistics class, or maybe in your math classes, they're learning some stats because they're getting a conditional probability, inference, margin of error, the difference between an observational study and experiment. Is it causation or not? All of this kind of stuff is definitely part of this test. So here's an example of one, and you don't really need a calculator for this one, I don't think. So the local library made SAT prep materials available for students at this high school. 100 of the 500 students picked up the free SAT prep material from the library. The 100 students who took the prep material did better on the SAT than the 400 who did not pick up the materials. Based on these results, which of the following is most appropriate conclusion? And so, one of the, I call this a mantra of stats. I teach AP stats, and one of them is correlation does not prove causation, right? To have causation, you really need an experiment for the most part, and not just an observational study. And so if you look at the wording of this, take additional prep materials from the library will cause an improvement. What do you think, Michael? Does that pass the mustard test, that answer choice A?
And this is not my wheelhouse, Jeff. You're gonna.
I understand. So it's not an experiment. There was no, they came up their own free will. They chose themselves. So that is not a random sample of folks, and so definitely not causation. So the second one, in fact, when you look at the cause there, the first three answers all talk about cause.
Yeah.
The last answer, which is the answer, says no conclusion about cause or effect can be made because because it was an observational study. Is the idea of this, and it's also suspect. Like, don't you think the best students are going to stop by the library potentially and pick up the extra materials to study some more? The hooligans, they're not gonna pick up the extra packet, right? So I think there's some of that to that as well. But you have to look at the wording carefully here on some of these stats questions, especially. They have a lot of these kind of like, is it linear or is it exponential? And I thought this one was, I like what you said, Michael. It's especially sneaky. Maybe it's classic SAT here, but I was tempted to put the wrong answer actually when I saw this. Were you tempted at all by this one?
I think I slowed myself down enough to not. Yeah.
Yeah. So this one is, of course, if you put an equation to it, f of x equals 1.5x, you go, oh, that's definitely increasing and it's linear. But when you think about percentages, you normally think it's going to be exponential. So
Right.
I thought it was a pretty tricky question. But it, really is just increasing by 1.5 every time. Okay, Michael, I'm going to hand it back to you to do the last section, which is geometry and trig. And you just have a couple minutes. I think I talked too long.
Oh, you're good. Hold on a second. Get caught up. There we go. Okay.
The answer for the last one was increasing linear D. So I thought that was kind of sneaky.
Yeah. Okay. Here we go. So geometry and trig is only 15%. That is so different from my ACT world, where geometry is a bigger chunk of stuff. So we're looking at stuff like area and volume, lines, angles, and triangles. Your, typical what you think of when you think of basic geometry, right triangles and trig. And then there's some circle stuff, which is pretty cool. And that's what we want to look at real quick. A graph of the given equation is a circle. What's the radius of the circle? Like, are we wanting to complete the square on this? What are people thinking?
Yeah.
Like, I got a minute and a half to do this problem. Can I do that? Or do I have another way? So I do have an app on the 84, and I've got this Conics app here, and I'm going to do a circle.
Yeah. David says, I hope there's another way other than completing the square. Some people don't enjoy complete the square.
Yeah, not my favorite either. So the A value here is 1. The B value is the coefficient of X. So that's going to be -4. I get on my students a lot about the difference between the minus button and the negative button. And on some apps that we use, it's the same thing. And I really hate that. C is going to be the coefficient of Y, which is 6. And then we got to be careful. D, because this thing's set equal to 0, D is going to be +4. And then I'm going to graph it. I got to hit enter. Oh, I got to hit graph. Okay. So what we can do here, if you're not able to tell what the radius is, you can trace, and it's going to trace. There we go. So I'm tracing, and I'm up here at the top, and my X is 2 and my Y is 0. And if I want to go over here, my X is -1. And so I did go from the top to the left-hand side. And, on this window, I could easily count it and see that it's 3, but I can also verify by that the distance between the 2 and that -1 is 3. So hopefully that's easier than doing it by hand. TI-Nspire is going to be pretty similar. And then this was kind of a tough one that we noticed.
Ooh, I thought those were. I did not guess right first on this one. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I think that's, knowing that ACT is kind of that. I think sometimes you got to know more content on the SAT. So that's my feeling for sure. I think it's a harder test. So if we're looking at this, sometimes looking at the answer choices and trying it out. So like, hey, let's look at this C. And so if you had if you had 44 for the legs, because that's what they said, what's one of the legs? And then, if you know your special right triangles, you know the hypotenuse is square root of 2 times the legs. And if you add that up, that's too much because you got 88 plus 44 root 2. So that's not going to do it. And then if you do choice B, you get 22 and then 22 times root 2. So you got 22 plus 22. And does that do it? I don't think that works either, right? Because that's 44 plus 22 root 2. And then we didn't have a slide that had the right one. If you had the 22 root 2 on the leg, you have 2 of those. So that's 44 root 2. And when you do the root 2 times the root 2, you get 2. And 22 times 2 is the 44. So it is choice B, if anybody's wondering.
And Michael, don't you think that special triangles were big on the SAT? We saw quite a few of those.
Yeah, I think so. Definitely.
Okay.
And then I think
Michael
that's
Houston.
we are sending it back to Mike Houston.
Thanks so much, guys. So we mentioned earlier that we're giving away to one lucky winner a TI graphing calculator of their choice, and tonight's lucky winner is Jamie Ballou. So Jamie, congratulations. Start thinking about which TI graphing calculator you'd like to receive, and I'll be reaching out to you soon to get some information. So congratulations, Jamie. To receive a certificate of attendance, go ahead and copy that link that I just posted in the chat into your browser. Also, it's the link for the documents. I know Jeff earlier had posted a link for the problems that they used from tonight. So Jeff, maybe if you have that handy, you could repost that link. I know that might be handy for some people. And I will update my documents link to include Jeff's link that he sent out with the problems. So whenever we get a follow-up email out to everyone with the recording, the certificate, and the documents, that will be updated there. And if you're watching this on demand, go ahead and copy that link into your favorite browser to receive your certificate. If you have any questions that we didn't get a chance to answer tonight, feel free to give us a call at 1-800-TI-CARES or send us an email at ti-cares@ti.com. When you leave the webinar tonight, you'll automatically get a very brief survey. We'd love to hear your thoughts about what went well and what you'd like to see in the future. So feel free to let us know with that as well. And if you're having any issues with either of the links for the certificate or the documents, just hang tight. Again, those links will be available in a follow-up email as well. Huge thanks to Jeff and Mike for all the time they put in to get ready for tonight.
Thanks. Appreciate it. It was fun.
Thanks for spending your time with us tonight. We really appreciate it. It was really cool to see people from all over the place interested in the SAT.
I agree. Thanks so much again, Mike and Jeff and everyone for joining us tonight from all across the world. We hope to see you back online next week. Have a great night.